Thank you for joining the VMware TAM customer webinar for February 2022. The VMware TAM community organizes this webinar to provide our customers the opportunity to hear great content from great speakers and to make sure that you're getting the full benefit from your VMware software. Please make use of the Q&A feature in Zoom to ask any questions, and if your question doesn't get addressed today, please reach out to your TAM to ask for a follow-up. Before we get into the content today, we have a couple basic announcements. Our next TAM customer webinar will be on March 3rd. In that session, we'll dive into the VMware Skyline service. That's VMware's proactive intelligence service that alerts customers of issues in their environments and guides them to remediate for better security, reliability, and productivity. Be sure to join us to get an overview of the service and to see all the new features in action. As I mentioned earlier, we want you to benefit from these sessions by interacting with the speaker. So if you have any questions during today's webinar, please use the Q&A feature of Zoom. Also, we have plenty of content to cover today, and we will likely address all your questions at the end of the session. So please be patient as we get to those. We greatly appreciate it. Speaking of the end of today's session, at the end, you'll be prompted to fill out a simple survey related to the value you received from this session. You'll also be asked to provide any topics you'd like to see in future sessions. Your completion of this survey is a very valuable gift back to us, and we greatly appreciate you completing it. Lastly, this webinar is being recorded, and your TAM can make the recording link available to you. And after a few months, the recording will be publicly available on the VMware TAM Services YouTube channel. That brings us to today's speaker and topic. Stephen Hajny joins us to go over the new features in the latest Horizon ESB release and how you can prepare to upgrade your environment. Stephen is the global TAM practice leader for our digital workspace solutions. He's a former DWS TAM in the healthcare vertical and former EUC PSO consultant, which has given him a ton of experience. It helped him develop a great relationship with the end user computing business unit at VMware. And prior to coming to VMware 6 years ago, he was a customer where he was an early adopter of many VMware technologies such as NSX and vSAN. We really appreciate him being here. Stephen, thank you so much. I'll hand it over to you to get us started.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. And good afternoon, everybody. So as Chris mentioned, right, we're going to be going over the latest ESB release, which was a major release for all things Horizon App Volumes Dynamic Environment Manager. We're going to talk a little bit about how also you can upgrade. And, if you're coming from the Horizon 7.x branch, what are the things that you need to be worried about? One, going to Horizon 8.2111. So disclaimer real quick, just off the top. We're not talking about any roadmap items. We're not talking about any future releases or features or any of that stuff. I am not part of the BU. We don't have everybody under NDA, right, as well. So we can't talk about any of that stuff, even if I did have the answers for that. So I just want to be very transparent up front about that. So agenda, we're going to be talking about the core platform, updates in 2111, instant clone updates, connection servers, agents, remote experience improvements, app volumes, dynamic environment management, and finally upgrade planning. How do you get from 7.13 to 2111? What are some things that you have to be worried about or cognizant of before you get there? So I would do a great disservice if I talk a little bit about our Horizon ESB and what ESB means, which is why a lot of customers are still on 7.13. So think of ESB as Microsoft's long-term service release. So the ESB is active for 36 months, which is our general support of 3 years. With that, you get 4 service packs. So critical bug fixes, security fixes, new Win 10 support. The core thing to think about is you don't get any new features, right? So 7.13 and 7.13.1 didn't introduce anything new from a feature perspective. We just fixed bugs that were already out there. And this gives customers kind of a stable release, right? Especially if you're in the healthcare space. And it includes Horizon App Volumes Dynamic Environment Manager and now Unified Access Gateway as well. You do have to be on all versions that are tied to that ESB release. So for example, you could not be running 7.13.1 and App Volumes 2111 and still be considered an ESB customer. You would have to upgrade all of those components to the latest version of the ESB. And then the goal of shipping out the set of ESBs every 12 months, right? So every 12 months, we're aiming to put out a release for the next ESB. So again, 36 months of support. So ESB for Horizon 8 will be supported for 36 months. Previously, it was 24 months with Horizon 7. And then we support ESB to ESB upgrades. So 7.10.3 and 7.13.1 directly to Horizon 8 2111. So you don't have to do any intermediary upgrade pass. And then maintenance updates. So we try to do 6, 9, 15, 24 months for the releases. So 7.13.1, for example. So you can expect like a 2111.1 or 2111.2 later on. You're not forced to upgrade to get the fixes, right? So you're not, when 2112 or 2212 comes out, you don't have to upgrade to get those fixes. We backport them to that ESB. And the biggest things that we validate these with things like Epic EMR and Nuance and Pravada and other peripherals that we have as well. And that's what these vendors test against. So some of the general updates we made for 2111. So support for Windows Server 2022. We also added a 30-day grace period. This was a big deal. So previously, if you had term licenses, if they expired, you wouldn't be able to access the Horizon console. So now we've added in a grace period for that. And then improvements with the agent when the connection server issues are detected. So preventing, machines from getting access that may not be available. Instead of getting those dreaded error messages on the end user end that says, hey, no desktop's available, or this desktop isn't ready for your connection. We also added some load throttling improvements to eliminate the RDSH black hole effect, so preventing new or no load balance or no load servers from getting a flood of requests from end users. And then configure it in load balance settings, connection session thresholds, and then load index thresholds. We've also added now that self-signed certs can auto-renew within 30 days of expiration, so you no longer have to do a manual process if you have self-signed certs. And then we've also added a ton of new APIs. So as Horizon continues to get developed and we're releasing new versions, we keep expanding our API for better automation. So things like, creating desktop pools and updating desktop pools, adding RDS farm servers, getting entitlements, etc. So there's a lot more in here, and you can actually see these all in the Swagger UI, which is now where you can learn about how the APIs work and being able to test out the APIs as well. And you can read more about that on the Tech Zone article that's in this PowerPoint. So session recording. So some of you may remember that there was a Fling at one point for session recording that was made by Andrew Morgan. We have now made that into the product. So that was, I believe, a release ago or 2 releases ago, 2111. However, in 2111, we added support for RDSH finally. Localization, we also renamed the Horizon recording. So we're able to record all keystrokes from an end user and all mouse clicks, etc., so that somebody can go back in. This is very useful for forensics, right? If a machine is compromised, you want to be able to see what that machine was doing at the time and auditing the overall environment. And then finally, OSOT has now been a product. So before it was the #1 Fling for many, many years. I remember using it, 7, 8 years ago when I was a customer. It is now actually a supported downloadable product for Horizon, which is fantastic to hear. And we now support it for Windows 11, Windows 10, 21H2, Server 2022, and Office 2021. However, just note that you do have to disable Microsoft Defender still with the latest patches. We do not disable it by default. And instant clones. So what's new with instant clones? So Horizon 2111 brought in supporting standard switches. So if you are coming in from the 7.x world, you may be familiar with link clones. It was very important for us to be able to add things to instant clones so that customers could switch over to instant clones. Before, the feature sets were very, very different. So we've added things like support for multiple NICs and link clone that now gives us link clone parity, and allowing maintenance mode for floating and dedicated instant clones as well, which was not possible before. Again, bringing that link clone parity up. And then selectively pushing instant clone images. I can name numerous times where I've had to, push a certain image out, but I didn't want to do it to everybody, and I only wanted to do it to like 1 or 2 images to kind of test it out, make sure that nothing broke beforehand. And we can now do that with 2111. You can test the image on a few machines before deploying it all. So it's called applying a secondary image and applying a default image. Horizon consoles, so untrusted domains. We now support for untrusted domains, authenticated users. Many customers didn't want to establish trust relationships. This is very big in the cloud deployments of Horizon with your on-prem environment. So this is now supported in 2111. This is just a quick step, right, of how do you do that, edit untrusted domain, and adding in those features or those settings. And then events filtering. So I do have a short demo on this as well, but there was a fling at one point made by Chris Halstead that would it was a third party console type of thing, right, where you could connect to the events database. And the events database would give you a bunch of stuff. Before, we used to limit that in what was in Horizon, and you'd have to do kind of manual SQL queries. So now you can choose from 2,000 to 20,000 events, custom date ranges, severity, able to view it in UTC for troubleshooting or local time, exporting the results. It's a lot more granular filtering without having to go into the SQL database. And then real quick, the demo. So again, you can see if you go into events under 2111, you can now change it to be from 2,000 to 20,000. In this case, we're doing 15,000, having the time in the UTC. And we can also retrieve the object values, right? So again, if I go to filter, you'll see that you get a ton of different stuff. So you can filter by messages, the severity, the custom date ranges like we're going to do here, the different modules. So if it's an admin that you're looking for, or if it was a machine that didn't load properly. And then finally, you can see the associated objects with it as well for those. So again, no more doing SQL queries, which I think was very burdensome for a lot of customers that were trying to do kind of the advanced filtering. So right now I want to look at, who couldn't get into a machine and what the error message was around that machine. And again, I can do the messages. So I can now say, hey, in those events, I only want to see bad username or password, for example. And now I can see why that user wasn't able to authenticate. And then finally, I can add a source in as well, right? Maybe I have a certain machine that a user wasn't able to authenticate, or a certain connection server. And then, of course, I can always download it to a CSV as well. So the other new feature that we added was, performing bulk machine operations. Something that I have seen happen a couple of times is when you think maybe you're only doing this on one or two machines, and for whatever reason you might have selected everything. So we now give you a pop-up that says, hey, by the way, you are doing this operation on more machines. Are you sure you want to do this, right? Just giving you another safety check in place. And it's the same thing with restarting desktops as well. So pretty much anything that you're doing in Horizon from a bulk machine operation, you can now kind of get an extra word of caution before you do it. So selecting page size. This is also great when you have customers at scale. I worked with a customer who had 300,000 desktops. Having only 20 rows per page was not great. So we can now have many more rows. And that way you can kind of choose a lot more objects without having to do it, in multiple steps, but also being able to see all those machines at once as well. The machine status dashboard. So adding the Horizon console dashboard to show machine status versus count information for VDI, RDSH, etc. Quick view of the machine console or status, and it's just adding parity to that Flex admin console that used to exist. And then RDSH drain mode indicator. So this was a big deal as well. Horizon admins, you needed a way to identify RDSH servers that are in drain mode, so that when you see my RDSH server only has one connection, what's going on? Why is this here? Why is there a problem with that server? You can now say, oh, that's in drain mode. That's why, and they're not accepting connections. So it's you're not thinking that's a load balancing issue. Background scan status for Carbon Black. So this is something that we added. I actually worked with a couple of the PMs on this and a few other field folks to kind of talk about what we wanted to see with Carbon Black. So when you have Carbon Black installed in the environment, you'll get a new pop-up. That pop-up will say, hey, did you scan that golden image? Was it scanned? Was it not scanned? And let you know when it's actually ready to go. So this is only Windows and it's only instant clones, but it's just adding in more benefits to the Carbon Black feature integration with Horizon as well. So I often see that in the field, right? Customers think that maybe they scan the environment, scan the desktop before they shut it down, and then suddenly their antivirus is telling them that they did not scan it, and now it's trying to run scans on all their instant clones, which of course is bad for CPU and resources. Horizon agent updates. So we gave the ability for agent installers to read from a text file. So again, kind of increasing that way to do automation. And, one command per line, and then VDM server password are not allowed, right? In the text file for very good reason. You can't put just plain text in the text file. We don't want to see that. We also removed the SVGA WDDM driver from the agent install. You'll probably remember that there was a KB that said, hey, whenever you upgrade the Horizon agent, make sure you reinstall tools, make sure you reinstall app volumes, all of these things. A lot of that was due to the SVGA driver for tools. Now we do not have it in the agent, so we're not tied to tools reinstalls. Instead, we're using the IDD driver, the indirect display driver. And we also added, of course, Windows 11 support and then Windows 10 21H2 support. And then integrated printing enhancements, right? Extending dynamic environment manager support to be able to use USB and Cedar and clipboard and watermark redirection, Horizon small policies. We've also added some operating systems such as SLED 15, Service Pack 3, and then watermark enhancements for DEM control and visual fixes. And then some of the other Linux stuff we've done is now we support Direct Connect for Linux VDI. We can do Linux published apps with vGPU as well, and then allowing customers to install the Horizon agent on the open OS Linux distribution that may not be included on our small list of Linux. So things like Mint OS or Debian, for example. Remote experience. So supporting redirect printers of the VDI suffix, dynamically updating icons on the taskbar, creating custom allow and block lists for the COM port redirection instead of allowing just everything to auto forward, URL redirection, support for browser-based RDSH apps, install sequence improvement, support Firefox with Windows, URL content redirection on IPv6, and then of course adding hardware acceleration, real-time video, audio, so Intel and NVIDIA GPUs. So some of the RTAB enhancements we've done, right, from the WAN perspective is helping with packet loss. I think COVID especially has brought a lot of remote, workforce, onto things like Zoom or WebEx or et cetera. So making sure that RTAB is very crisp and it's not using a ton of resources is extremely important. So RTAB video adapter, we can now do frame rate based on CPU and network performance. And we can also indicate now a completion of printer redirection in the Windows event logs. So being able to see when a printer actually redirected or if it didn't redirect properly. And then new group policies that control DPI for redirected printers. So nested clients, we now support a mismatch, which was not the case before. It's an N+1 or -1 support. So for example, if I'm on Horizon 21.11.0 and then I have 21.11.1, I can now have a nested mode that has one agent on 21.11.1 and then one on .0. Enhanced alt tab behavior. So previously focus might return to a Windows title bar and not the application after using alt tab. We now return to the application as expected. And then integrated printing and preview, UI changes, and then MMR, multimedia redirection, is getting supported when using Blast Protocol on Windows Client as well for multiple audio output devices. And then some other Blast enhancements. So Blast has, you had PC over IP in Blast. VMware develops Blast. PC over IP has always been developed by Teradici. So we keep continuing to make enhancements towards Blast. Reducing CPU usage by optimizing capture path, single buffer capture for software encoding, enabling direct capture path for WDDM, reducing the buffer that's used to communicate, adding shared cache for the Horizon agent native client. It's enabled by default, and it is for the Horizon Linux agent as well. And then improving Blast codec speed, client speed improvements, multi-threaded decode, and async client decode. I actually have some stuff that talks about bandwidth in here as well, and what kind of the performances we've seen. So Blast Codec is now customizable cache to reduce bandwidth. Again, when I think of remote workers or folks, that kind of got displaced, that maybe not having the best of internet services at their house now versus being in the office, I always think of bandwidth, trying to make sure that they're not hitting their bandwidth caps at home and causing, poor performance. So we can now, change your customizable cache for Blast. So it used to be hard-coded at 256, and now you can change that. We have a little bit on the side of kind of what the cache utilized and then what you'll see for bytes sent and bandwidth savings. So if you use 540, for example, you'll save about 13%. And this cache, like I said, does work for Windows and Linux agents. So what we're seeing on average is 9.5% improvement in bandwidth consumption. So again, this is using that shared cache. This is a mixed workload of full Horizon desktops, Windows virtual desktops on Azure standard. And you can see where we were in the Q4 of 2022, and then where we were in Q2 of 2022. So the improvements that we've been making. And of course, Microsoft Teams optimization. So we do support Microsoft Teams. I know Zoom and WebEx have their own third-party kind of add-ins that they can use with Horizon. But from a Teams perspective exclusively, we work with Microsoft. So we now support the Horizon Chrome client for those that are using Chromebooks, and then optimization for HTML access. Again, this is a lot around Chrome browser and Microsoft Chromium Edge. Just be sure to check that little asterisk. So if you look at the bottom, it is turned off by default, and it will only be available after a full rollout of the WebRTC 1.0 update from Microsoft Teams, and they give you a link to kind of check that for the timeline. So again, some of the other Teams improvements. So E911 calling, live captions on meetings, multiple Windows support for popping out from chat, custom together mode screens for Windows, Mac, and Linux clients. And then of course, WebRTC 1.0 support when that is fully rolled out from Microsoft. App volume. So apps on demand is a really cool feature of 2111. So before, when you would log into a virtual desktop that had app volumes on it, it would attach all of those app stacks or all those packages at once, right? And which oftentimes led to longer login times. Maybe a user didn't always need their apps right away. There was just a lot of kind of complexity behind that, and it kind of tend to held up that login time, giving users a poor performance. We can now select when we're creating a package to say, hey, you're only going to do this once I click on that application to run it. So I have a short demo that talks about Windows or app volumes, apps on demand. And so in this example, we're going to use Excel. So I'm going to go to my taskbar. I'm going to see that Excel is there, but I don't see it in add or remove programs. So I'm going to double click it. It's going to load. You're going to see a flicker of screen, which normally is a refresh. And then you'll see it open up. And so again, giving folks apps only when they need them versus trying to shove them all at login times, especially when you have a large amount of apps. And then you won't see it there. And there we go. Office is now installed. Something else that we added was multi-instance applications. So before, you would have multiple app volume instances, especially if you were at size or scale. You may have a pod and you may have multiple pods in just one data center, right? If you're kind of bumping up the things, you may have a UAT environment, you may have a dev environment, you may have a test environment even. And we often use storage groups to kind of move them around. But the thing that we didn't really capture is the metadata. So now in multi-instance applications, we're now capturing the metadata as well and bringing them. So how this works is it uses one centralized instance of app volumes, and then we'll push that metadata out, and that will be the single source of truth. It does not replicate entitlements right now. It does not replicate the actual VMDKs themselves. We're still using storage groups for that. That is a native app volumes feature. So there are some requirements for using application synchronization. So source and target instances must have 2111 and later. Only replicated packages from the source are imported or that are imported to the target can be synchronized. Unidirectional from a source instance to a target instance. Synchronization occurs for all replicated packages. Again, entitlements and application packages and markers cannot be synchronized yet. Each instance can have multiple source instances and target instances. Applications and packages created only by that app volumes instance can be synchronized. And then applications and packages that are synchronized can only be managed and edit, delete by an admin on the source instance. So no more having to log into like 10 different app volumes managers in order to kind of hit the delete button and hope that you got them all in the right time before they replicated to themselves. And then only changes to enabled packages that are synchronized to the target instance. And dynamic environment manager. So agent log on and log off change. So we no longer need a log off script for DEM agent sync tool, and then we always wait for the we don't always wait for the network at computer startup and login. So special log on and log off scripts are no longer needed for DEM. So just again, making it a bit better from a script standpoint instead of having to have kind of these custom scripts for when you're not using GPOs. And we can now also override GPOs as well. So I've seen before with customers who, security has pushed out a certain GPO and they pushed it out to the entire org. The problem is that virtual desktops are supposed to be exempt, but because of how complex AD structure is, it was much harder to kind of change those GPOs. We can now override those using Dynamic Environment Manager as well for machine-based policies. And we can also disable DEM's features for personalization as well. And then printing. So mapping in its own process. I've had a customer before who had about 50 to 60 printers they were mapping for every user all at once. The challenge with that is it kind of overloads the print server and then overloads the login process as well. So now we can have its own process with its own timeout option, so we're not impacting the rest of the environment for it. And then OneDrive for business integration. So the ability to use OneDrive for profile archives and log files without using the OneDrive agent as well. So upgrade planning. We went through this a little bit faster than I thought we were. I know we had a lot of content to cover, but I think the biggest thing that customers get questions on is how do I upgrade from Horizon 7.x to 2111? So maybe you have link clones. So you have to remember that link clones are gone in Horizon 8. So we need to switch over to instant clones. Persona management is also gone. So I have some customers that are using persona management. We did add dynamic environment standard replacement, but how do you get there? What are the things that you have to take? What are the steps you have to take to get to that? Monitoring changes. So one of the big things that I expect to get a lot of questions on is V4H. So V4H is end of life. It goes out of support with 7.13. So how do I swap over to this new management pack that I've been hearing about? What is this control up thing that I also hear about that's a third party? What is the stance that I need to worry about when I go to upgrade if I'm using those products? And then app volumes 2.x to 4.x. So app volumes 4.x introduced a bunch of new concepts, right? We introduced packages and applications versus app stacks. So gone are the traditional ways you think about app volumes or app stacks. And then, we do have a fling to help you migrate over to it. So upgrading from upgrading to 2111, apologies, from Horizon 7. So we do have a great tech zone article that talks about this. What does a successful migration look like? How do I get to instant clones? How do I get to dynamic environment manager? From persona management, we have different tabs based on maybe what you're doing. So if you're going from persona management, for example, to dynamic environment manager, it's pretty straightforward. Typically you run both in parallel and then just kind of cut persona management off. But you can also use things like FS logic, right? Maybe you want to do some Office containers, or maybe you want to do just folder redirection versus redirecting the whole profile, and then from an instant clone to link clone, how do you get there? If you're thinking about customers who have link clones, they're using them in kind of a full clone kind of concept. How do I get there? What do I have to do? Does instant clone support longer lived? Is what we call them for instant clones. Yes, we can mimic kind of a link clone kind of feature parity and make those not delete upon log off, so that a developer, for example, can kind of create their sandbox environment they've been used to with link clones. And I think the biggest thing that, like I said, everybody kind of talks about is VROPs. So what is going on with VROPs? And what was V4H? So V4H was this old, vRealize for Horizon that would come kind of as part of your license agreement with VMware. It was a third-party tool that was, or not third-party, but it was a third-party BU product, I guess you could say. It wasn't made by the EUC BU. It was kind of developed in correlation with the VROS BU as well. And so support often was a little bit troublesome for it. It took a lot to kind of get things done. It wasn't supported the greatest. So we decided to kind of go from that path to kind of a native VROPS monitoring standpoint. So the thing to keep in mind is this does require VROPS Advanced or VRCU vRealize Cloud Universal standard for the infrastructure. So instead of getting kind of V4H CCUs, as they used to call them, or concurrent user connections, you now have to kind of license your VROPS environment for the Horizon environment as well. So just a brief V4H challenges, right? These are the reasons why we changed. Is it was agent-based, it was a rigid data model, it was very vSphere-based capacity model, and it was very complex. So again, I had an agent on everything, and to get B resources for it, you would often call in support. Support would, transfer you to the VROPS team, and you'd have to kind of work in parallel with the V4H team, who is very limited in how many folks they had working on it. And now when you upgrade to 2111 or to the new management pack, we've added it to be API driven. So again, we talked earlier about how Horizon APIs have expanded, and we've also kind of changed to be a uniform data model. So before you would have V4H, and you'd have to kind of edit a lot of settings, right? Because it was built for servers, not built for VDI. So things like instant clones would leave a lot of remnants behind and kind of make a database fill up on the old VROPS environment. So now we're kind of taking into account link clones and instant clones for this. And then Horizon-based capacity model versus just a vSphere-based capacity model. And we've also simplified the licensing. So now it's not having V4H licensing and VROPS licensing. It's just having VROPS licensing for getting that management pack. And then some of the things that we just recently upgraded to for 2.0 of the management pack. So we added UAG, services and session monitoring. We added connection server service monitoring as well, Horizon user and capacity right sizing, Horizon VDI, pool right sizing, capacity optimization, updated dashboards, and pool pod certificate validation. So we consistently are upgrading what the management pack can do, right? What its capabilities are. So some dashboards I wanted to kind of show you, right? So the UAG summary page, you'll notice this looks very much like VROPS, just like it did before. We just added a lot more data to it. So again, being able to see UAG and what's connected to the UAG, what VMs are connected to the UAG, where did it go, what's the path, and then some stats about UAG as well. And then Horizon monitoring service. So being able to say, oh, is the connection server actually up? I see that it's powered on, but is the service itself healthy, right? That's something that we never had before. We never had a way to really say, oh, well, is the service healthy before, an end user calls you and goes, hey, I can't log in. So being able to see kind of that health monitoring status for the critical services. And performance for users. So again, we're getting in that data as you would for VROPS, on latency, login time, CPU performance, who's got the most CPU usage, right? Who do we need to bump up in CPUs, and then VDI memory, et cetera, and contention. So something that people ask a lot, right, is, hey, the management pack sounds great, but it doesn't fit all of my use cases, or maybe I'm not sure if it fits all of my use cases. So we did partner with ControlUp. ControlUp is not a VMware product. It's completely separate. However, we are great partners with them. How we've kind of thought of this is if you need live metrics, so VROPS is about 5 minutes for collection gathering, just about, where ControlUp is constantly live and feeding data in live. And if you need more trends, maybe you need some in-guest help desk support, kind of a assist, and maybe you need some more performance metrics and being able to shut down and run scripts and all kinds of other stuff. ControlUp is a good use case for that. So I think of this as, if I think of this in a tiered type of environment, your help desk folks are going to be doing ControlUp, whereas your infrastructure folks are probably going to be more interested in the overall health of the environment. So they're going to be using the management pack. And something else from an app volumes perspective, as we shift gears, I talked a little bit earlier about how app volumes change the terminology. So if you look on the left, you'll see that back in the day, in the 2.x days, which doesn't seem like it was so long ago, was your core app stack. So you might have Firefox and Acrobat and Office, and maybe you had another app stack that had Java and Visual Studio, and those were just an app stack, and they were very static, I guess you could say. And if you had to update Firefox, you had to update that entire app stack. You couldn't just do one app in that app stack. it had to, everything had to get kind of updated at once. And so we switched over to this application package program mentality. So now you have an application, and now within the application, you might have multiple packages. So you may have reader 11, or you may have reader DC. And then within that, you may have version 11 bits, and then you may have version DC bits. So this allows me to say, hey, I have Adobe Acrobat 8, 9, and 10, and I want to use 10, but I want to test that out first. So I'm going to flag 10 for only my test use cases. I'm going to flag 9, which is my standard currently, for everybody else to use without having to kind of go through and update the entire app stack and push it out. So now we add flags and markers. The challenge is if you're going from app stacks to this package application mentality, how do you get there, right? What are some, you have to repackage everything, but is there an easier way to get there? Is there something that I can do to kind of make this easy? I think of some customers who have thousands of app stacks, and they're not going to sit down and just spend all that time kind of repackaging things. So there is a fling that will help you. So I do tell folks that, take the time from an app volumes 4.x standpoint to kind of repackage some of these things that maybe you've had issues with in the past. You can use the fling, but just keep in mind that it's just copying those files. So if you kind of had some app stacks that weren't quite great or working well to begin with, you're not really gaining anything by just porting them over, except for gaining a little bit of time. However, with that being said, something that we do support is if you are moving to 2111 for app volumes, we can still run the app volumes 2.x agent on the machine. So some customers are comfortable with repackaging. And so what they're going to do is they're going to repackage, but for now they want to be able to let their users still connect and get their app stacks. So you can do that in the 4.x console. You'll see that there'll be a volumes 2.x if you have any 2.x agents talking to it. And the app stacks will show up for those. And then questions, I see we have quite a few in the chat. So, and this went a bit faster, so I think we can get through a lot of Q&A.
Yeah, there are a few questions here. Stephen, do you just want to go through the list?
Yep, I will. Yeah.
Just to see what's relevant.
Yeah, just give me 1 second. So we had a question that was, does the secondary instant clone deployment also work on application pools? I believe, yes, it does, but I'll have to validate for that just to make sure, and I'll get back to you. Let me just take that down to my own notes.
Yeah, and you can also follow up with your TAM to for any follow-up questions, things like that, just for everyone.
Yeah. And then are app files and DEM backwards compatible with Horizon 2011? So typically, yes, right? You can check our interop matrix for that, and it will tell you. But I have seen customers running app volumes 4.x, for example, with the earlier versions of Horizon. And then I'm going to assume, based on the interop matrix, that you'll be able to see if Horizon 2111, for example, can support app volumes 2.x. So it's just an interop matrix question. You can go to the website, interopmatrix.vmware.com, to kind of see what versions are exactly compatible. And then in my experience, settings like rows per page, et cetera, have to be reset every time one logs into the console. Is there a setting that I'm missing, or will I allow these to persist for the admin sessions? That's another one I'll have to follow up with. I thought 2111 you could do that, but I will follow up on that just to clarify. So if you want to have your TAM reach out, I'll get that answer.
Let's see, are there any others in here?
Yeah, I'm looking right now. There's a few roadmap items that, like I said, I can't answer. So I think one of them was any news on writable volumes, right? So writable volumes still exist, if that is the question in app volumes 4, but there hasn't been any new releases around writable volumes. And that's the same thing with the writable volumes HA question as well, right? Is moving those through. And are there any risks to downtime involved in performing an in-place upgrade of Horizon 7.13 directly to 21.11? So this is a great question. So no, right? There isn't downtime per se, depending on how your environment is set up. So if you're doing tunneling, which is something that some customers do where they tunnel everything through Horizon, then yes, you'll have a little bit of downtime, right? Because you're still upgrading the connection servers. But it's just like any other upgrade for Horizon. It's just going through that connection servers and kind of clicking them through and clicking next and then letting it sync up and doing the next one, etc. Will ESB support 7.10.x be extended even for 2 to 3 months? So I do not believe that is the case. I believe you can buy extended support for some products. I'm not sure if 7.10 would be applicable. I would say that if you need to buy time until 21.11 to go to 7.13.x, which is the latest. And then yes, I believe the session recording will be shared out. And then is control of something then like a Dynatrace or app dynamics monitoring? So a little bit yes and no. I haven't used Dynatrace in quite a bit, but control up, as I understand it, is like a live feed of all this data, right, from the VM. So it is a cloud-based solution. I don't have a tremendous amount of details on it just because it's not a VMware-owned product. But from what I've seen, it's really nice. I have a customer that was able to really dive deep in the login times with it and being able to go, oh, I have this trend for my login time, and then I have this user that's the one who's causing the kind of skew. So I wouldn't say it's exactly the same, but it is a little bit similar. And then what are the best resources for digging further into the install configure VROS management pack? So the cool thing about the VROS management pack is if you're familiar with any of our other management packs, it's exactly the same. You can't run V for H with the management pack though. So let me just caveat that. So if you have VROPS today, and say you have enough licenses, right? You have enough licenses for your infrastructure cluster, you're not going to buy anything new, but you're already using that for V for H. It will not let you install that management pack with V for H, so you have to remove the adapter. But there are some resources out on TechZone and then our normal doc site that kind of how to install, but it's very easy. It's from the marketplace, marketplace.vmware.com to get that management pack. And then we are running version 7.13 and have been upgrading from version 5. I'm assuming that's Horizon 5. Is it advisable to build in parallel or move to Horizon 8? If you're going from Horizon 5, I assume that maybe you may be talking client 5.x, but if you're talking about Horizon 5, yeah, I would just net new build, to be honest. It's extremely old, and so I'm assuming that you're gonna have to do kind of hops anyways. So I would definitely just do an upgrade process in place. So what is the new upgrade, or what is the upgrade process to the new ESB version? On a reinstall of all the agents needed? Yes, right? So just like if you were to upgrade 7.10 to 7.13, you're reinstalling that Horizon agent. So that is still something that you have to do. For that, the connection servers are the same with any other upgrade, right? It's just double clicking those bits on the connection server. It actually uninstalls and reinstalls. And if you ever notice that in the install process, it really just is doing a reinstall, doesn't really do a traditional upgrade. And then regarding app volumes, can you remain on 2.x version does need to be upgraded to 4.x? So 2.x is supported until I believe it is October 2022. You can find that on lifecycle.vmware.com just to validate me on that without misspeaking. So that is out there publicly when it goes end of life. However, like I said in the presentation, you can run 2.x agents with the 4.x environment, right, for the manager. So for whatever reason, you're not comfortable upgrading quite yet to all your agents to 2.x, maybe you have a huge environment, right? You can run the 2.x with the 4.x management. And do you have an upgrade process? So yes, there's an upgrade process out there as well for 7.13 to 21.11. Like I said before, it's a lot of just double clicking the bits like any other traditional install. There's really not much. The only caveats, of course, are if you're running link clones versus instant clones, then you're going to want to switch over to instant clones first and then upgrade. The next one is always a fun question that I like. Is you no longer need, or you mentioned no longer need to reinstall tools when updating the agent. Do we still need to follow the install order of tools, agent, and Flex Engine, which is Dynamic Environment Manager, and app volumes would also be on that list. So if you are using the latest agents, right, that have the IDD driver in them, then no, you don't need to reinstall tools. However, Dynamic Environment Manager has always been really easy. You don't need to reinstall that either, even though I know it's on the order of installs. The biggest two that I've gotten bit by before is app volumes and the agent. So if you are doing an agent upgrade, you can just do the agent upgrade now without having to do the tools reinstall. However, you should still uninstall app volumes and reinstall app volumes. And the reason for this is because it virtualizes the entire machine and turns into a non-persistent machine, which is why we don't support persistent machines with app volumes. And then the next question was kind of the same thing, right? Are we going to see a change with the Horizon agent and app volumes and VMware tools become less intensive? So yeah, so you shouldn't have to reinstall tools anymore. You just have to reinstall the agent or upgrade the agent and app volumes. And I answered the, if you're going from our app volumes 2111, if you're going there and you need to do from 21 or 2000, 2.18. Well, I can't speak today. Will we have to recreate our existing app stacks? So you can migrate them with the Fling. The Fling works great. Like I said, the issue with the Fling, or the issue that I have from just like being a customer, is that I always think of like junk out when I'm upgrading. Like I don't want to have a bunch of old stuff in there. So typically what I'll do is I'll repackage. But if you're a large customer or you're stretched on resources, you can just use the Fling and it will just migrate the app stacks into packages. And then, yeah, so could you talk more about the enhancements that allow instant clones to be leveraged in a similar way as link clones for dev and sandbox situations? So something that we introduced, I think a couple of versions ago in Horizon 8 was longer lived instant clones. So before, if you logged off an instant clone, it just deleted and that was it, right? It rebuilt. The challenge with that is if I have a user that needs their instant clone tomorrow or what have you, that was kind of an issue, right? If I got forced off. So now you can have longer lived instant clones, which will allow you to keep those alive for much longer. Again, giving that feature parity to link clones where you could have it set to not refresh or push on log off. What is the impact version of mixed match versions of 7.13.21.11 in the upgrade process? So we always support that for an upgrade. We do not support it long term. VMware, we don't put, hey, the upgrade must last exactly 2 hours, right, in our documentation. However, if you were to have an issue and you say, hey, I upgraded a week ago and I haven't upgraded the agents, for example, that is, GS is probably going to tell you to upgrade the agents first. They're not going to spend too much time troubleshooting. With that being said, you cannot run 7.13.1 connection servers with 2111 agents. So just keep that in the back of your mind, right? Connection servers and then agents typically are what we support. And does this version of release Workspace ONE access have any correlation to the ESP versions? No. So Horizon ESPs are strictly just app volumes, Dynamic Environment Manager, and Horizon. Workspace ONE is not included in that. And then I can't talk about the app volumes management pack for VROPS. I apologize. You can get the slides and the session will be recorded. Do you need to get licenses for the new management pack? Something that we talked about earlier is, yes, you need to have VROPS Advanced or VRCU Standard, which actually comes with VROPS Advanced as part of like the suite packaging. So you do need to license your infrastructure for VROPS if you haven't already today. So I've seen some customers that kind of double license where they use the V for H adapter for some things and they were still using kind of the infrastructure environment as well. And then the migration from 2.x to 4.x, we talk about that again, but that's that Fling. That Fling is extremely useful and will do exactly that. I still highly recommend, right, and I'll say it over and over again, but I highly recommend that you guys go out there and repackage when you can, just because of the way we change things. You don't want, say, your package of business apps, right, to contain Office, Firefox, and Adobe. And now every time you have to update Adobe, you have to open that entire stack. I've seen customers who swear they have only updated Adobe when they had Office in there, then Office broke the next day. So it's always good to kind of separate them when you guys get some time to do so. And just looking at some of the other questions that are in here. How are the reports being handled in 2.0? Reporting, which does not seem to be there anymore with the management pack. I believe we added some reports in the 2.0 management pack, but have your TAM reach out and we'll validate, and we can at least get, if you guys are under NDA, kind of a roadmap of when any more are coming. And then again, so this question is a little bit different, and I'm going to take it as if it's different. You may mean that 7.13.0, or you may be 7.13.x in general, but any updates regarding the upgrading connection service from 7.13. So make sure you get to .1 first of 7.13 and then upgrade to 21.11. So just to keep that in mind, right, we support the latest ESB release version to 21.11. So 7.10.3. and then 7.13.1. It may not seem like a big deal. You may be thinking that it's 0.1 releases, but when you're talking about ESB, they could be major bug fixes that are in those versions. Events database still does require a SQL server, right? So we're just kind of taking away the idea of using a SQL query to get some of those events database. Yes, app volumes doesn't be installed last, right? That is still the gold standard for all of this stuff. You have to install app volumes last, and when you do and install the agent, you still have to uninstall app volumes and then reinstall it at the end. Is there a good resource which documents the different processes of building applications and packages? Yes, I believe there's actually some documents on TechZone. So techzone.vmware.com, which is the place for all things EUC and VMware. That is something to check out. I believe we go into depth about how to kind of do that. And we still have some number of KBs out there with recipes, right? On, hey, I'm doing Office. What should I take for Office installs? Concerning the UAG, will we be able to update it similar to a vCenter? Meaning each time we need to update, we have to build a new AUEG. Yeah, I know. So it's still that way. You still have to export the JSON file. I've seen some folks kind of automate it, and you can do that, but you still have to do the rebuild of it, right? And kind of do it. If VMware tools is updated, all the other pieces still need to be updated or reinstalled. So app volumes, I would definitely reinstall. The agent, you should not have to reinstall, because again, we took the big piece that was tied to the agent was the VGA driver. So since we took that out of the agent, you shouldn't have to reinstall the agent now when you upgrade tools. But again, still do app volumes, just because I've seen so many issues with app volumes. Since the log4j patch came out after 21.11, is there any concerns in going from 7.13.1 patched version to 21.11? So there is actually a patch version for 21.11 as well, and that's the standard build number out there now. So I don't think unless you downloaded 21.11 before the patch came out, then you may still have that old unpatched version, but the patched version is out there for 21.11 now. I'm just kind of scrolling through to see any other questions that I may have missed that I can answer. Like I said, I know that there was some roadmap questions out there that I can't answer. I apologize. Again, you can always reach out to your TAM to get kind of roadmap questions.
Yep, for sure. Let me see if going through. You think we're at the end of questions at this point, Stephen?
Just give me 1 second. Let me just make sure.
Okay. Great questions, by the way.
So will there be a possibility to change CPU memory settings for instant clones for different desktop pools? So if your golden image has 2 CPUs and you have 6 gigs of CPU, yeah, you still are required to have separate pools. I believe you can. We capture it in snapshots, but it gets really messy. really fast if you do it that way. So I do recommend having two separate pools or two separate golden images for that, and just having them for your sizing needs. For sure. And I think that is about it from the question standpoint.
Awesome. Any other content? This is the end. Just want to make sure before we move on.
Yeah, nope, this is the end of it. And I hope that some folks gained some knowledge and insight about kind of what came from 2111, and then also how to kind of upgrade from 7.x to 2111. Because I know it's been a source of some frustration for customers not kind of having a way forward, right? Especially if they were using some of that legacy stuff like link clones or persona management, especially, or V for H, and how that's kind of gone now, and what are the options.
Yeah, Stephen, this was a great session. We really appreciate you being here to go over all this. So thank you for presenting on this topic, and for taking the time to answer all the questions. We really appreciate it. So this concludes the webinar. As we mentioned at the beginning, this was recorded, and your TAM will make that available to you. Thank you all for attending. And as Stephen said, we hope you benefited from this and enjoyed the content. A quick correction on next month's webinar, that will be on March the 10th, not March the 3rd. I apologize for the confusion on that. Again, that'll be March the 10th. That session will be an overview of the VMware Skyline service. So we hope that you can join us. Thanks again for joining us today, everyone, and we will see you next time.